Hi, I'm Diana Giselle Yanez, host of Highly Sensitive Money. I'm a money coach, certified financial planner, and a highly sensitive person who brings money and social justice together. If you're someone who feels deeply, can endlessly think through how one decision affects everything else, or has ever struggled with all the things that traditional financial thinking leaves out, you're in the right place. In this show, I chat with highly sensitive people on how they handle their money, and with money experts on how they cultivate social justice in their work. Questions? Please go to allthecolors.net and schedule a free 30-minute call. And I'm happy to share resources on investment management, money coaching, workshops, or anything else money and social justice related. Join us in this episode as we explore money and sensitivity while honoring that all of our well-being is interconnected. Today, we get to hear from Jordyn Middlebrooks, a fellow financial coach, advisor, and organizer whose work sits beautifully at the intersection of money, justice, and belonging. We talk about what it means to reimagine wealth, not as something to hoard, but as something to move, share, and root in community. Jordyn shares their journey of coming out as someone with class privilege in organizing spaces and how asking for help can build deeper trust and connection. One of the most powerful takeaways for me was how Jordyn helps people find their enough number, not from scarcity or guilt, but through visioning, values, and practical reflection. We also explore burnout and movement spaces, mutual aid as a safety net, and why sensitivity can be a gift in financial work. It's a deeply tender, honest, and grounding conversation, and I'm so glad you're here for it. Welcome to Highly Sensitive Money. In today's episode, I am very excited to have Jordyn Middlebrooks join us. Jordyn and I met through RAD Planners, which is an organizing space for activists becoming financial planners and financial planners becoming activists. That's how I would describe it, although I've had other guests who describe it differently, and I'll love to hear Jordyn's own description. But before I give Jordyn the microphone, I just want to give some background on why we're here. Jordyn recently started her own podcast, Reimagine Wealth, and her first 2 episodes were sharing her story. And I had so many follow-up questions that just kind of bubbled up inside of me. So this is like a part 3 to her to her intro podcast. So thank you so much, Jordyn, for coming on and for being willing to answer these additional questions about you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
And before I dive into my questions, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and your work and what brought you to RAD Planners and where you are now.
Yes, absolutely. Well, hello, everyone tuning in. My name's, like Diana mentioned, Jordyn Middlebrooks. I use she and they pronouns, and I'm calling in from Kankakee, Karankawa, and Lipan Apache land, otherwise known as Austin, Texas. Lived in the southern so-called U.S. my whole life. And I came into this work within this RAD Planners community. Maybe some of you have heard about this already in other episodes, but there's a track called Becoming a Radical Advisor, or like the BRAD track, which is also a play on like Brads and Chads being advisors. So BRAD, or Brad as it's spelled. I came into this work through really wanting and noticing all of the ways that all of the systemic injustices are really tied up in capitalism. Capitalism is that foundation that really makes things like white supremacy, homophobia, transphobia, the genocide that's happening in Gaza right now. I mean, if we can think of really any form of injustice, it ties back to capitalism, because it's how are we concentrating wealth and power to remove the democracy from our day-to-day lives. So I didn't make that conclusion immediately. It wasn't like I had an epiphany moment one day, but through my story, and if you listen to those episodes, I go into much more detail, but I saw how our healthcare system was really unjust for people who don't have access to health insurance, for people who don't have access to wealth, juxtaposed to mutual aid that was happening around the community for a family member that I was caring for at the time. And that got me thinking about my own wealth and class privilege. And I started to make some of these connections along the way. And I started thinking about, well, what if, and I didn't think this was going to be a job, just to be clear. I was thinking, what if there was a way to actually work with politicized wealth holders to actually move that money through the spirit of repair, redistribution, reparations, because I was seeing a lot of politicized donors, a lot of politicized wealth holders who would get stuck when they talk to their advisor or when they talk to their tax professional or these different what we call the wealth defense industry professionals that really become gatekeepers of wealth and prevent that money from flowing even within the politicized progressive spaces. So that brought me to Rad Planners. This is becoming a longer story than I intended. That brought me to Rad Planners, and I came into that space thinking about like, how could I start building these skills? I know nothing about finance other than I was managing my own assets at the time. So turns out I actually knew more than most people because it's intentionally convoluted and mysterious. And I took the Series 65. I started talking to folks like yourself, Deanna, that I really looked up to be like, hey, how did you do this? Is this like a job? Is this a real thing? So there's more in my story there, but that's how I came into this work, through the lens of an organizer wanting to remold the way the system works.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And again, I invite people to go back and listen to those first 2 episodes. There were a couple of terms that you used that I really loved and that I want to just like bring back up for people, like politicized wealth holders, right? Not all wealth holders are politicized. And then you talked about the defensive financial system, which is like the people who want to keep the status quo, the system, the way that it is. And yeah, those are just really important. Sometimes it's like having the language to describe what it is that we're moving towards can really open up people's eyes to like different ways of being. So thank you. Thank you for bringing that in.
Of course.
And in your story, you share about going into organizing spaces and feeling that you had to hide some of your background in order to do that, that there was there was like a division that was happening. I would love to hear more about that. And if there's an experience that you had where you like became aware of this, and then what it was like to now be incredibly open about how politicized you are and also about your money. You're also incredibly transparent about your money in both episodes.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Such a good question. To be honest, I don't think I've come to like, this is how I am and it's perfect and everyone accepts me. But at the time, I was co-leading a group called the Sunrise Movement, which is a climate justice organization. There's different chapters across the US. There might be more beyond the US now. But I was co-leading the Austin chapter. And I talk about this more in my story, but I had kind of been a mini like environmentalist my whole life, and then started to get more and more politicized around the intersectionality. So I had moved more towards climate justice. And my co-leader was someone who had immigrated from Mexico and was not able to find a job because of their immigration status. And it really brought it like up close and personal in terms of all of these things that I take for granted. Having a job that provides me with more income than I spend, having a retirement account, having healthcare, having the ability to vote. This person can't even vote in the day-to-day that shapes them in Austin. And there's so much more beyond that. But I felt so guilty. And before that, even ashamed of like, who am I to be leading this group? And there's, if you're in leftist spaces, there's a lot of language and narrative around let the people most directly impacted lead. And I think that's true. And I also think that we all need to show up in different ways and that we all have things to offer and give. So just want to name that there's a contradiction there at times. And I was feeling really ashamed of, well, what if I get found out or discovered as like, I have privilege that is, which like also, if you saw me, you would probably already know, like I wear athleisure, I have an Apple Watch, I talk a certain way, I can use jargon and terminology that the academia spheres use. Like, I'm sure that it wasn't like a surprise, but it was something that I felt really ashamed and thinking about like, oh, what if these people ever saw where my parents live, or the fact that I had access to a home. I live in the home that my partner owns, and I would have people over, and I was even ashamed to be like, hey, like, come to my home. Like, most of those people didn't have a home. So, or were renting is what I mean. But yeah, so it brought up a lot of shame. That shame turned into anxiety and fear of being found out. And what it really threatened was my sense of belonging and my sense of identity. Like, how can this identity that I hold as like an organizer, as an activist be true if I'm also a part of the class that we're fighting against, this like eat the rich? And so I was like, oh, do they want to eat me? Like, what is happening? And, you know, that was something that I grappled with still to this day. I feel anxious about kind of sharing that part of myself because I think it means that people won't trust me or will believe that I'm disingenuous. And I have to also show up in deep accountability to like not just use the power that I have to control the way that things are happening. But there's a story around at the time I had kind of left the Austin chapter of the Sunrise Movement. I had gone through like a movement breakup. There was a lot of repair that just didn't end up happening that was needed. But I found out that people were talking about me behind my back. And so I was like, you know, I need to take a beat. But that brought up a lot of the shame and anxiety that I was having. And then later, this is about 1.5, 2 years later, I'm tabling for this group called Resource Generation, which is this public group of we're the top 10% people organizing to equitably and justly redistribute wealth. And the Sunrise Movement folks were also at this event. And so I was seeing these people that I hadn't spoken to in 1.5 years or so. And I felt so uncomfortable. I was like, wow, like this is their first time seeing me kind of out myself in this way. And there were some people that just totally ignored me. There were some people that came up and talked to me and everything was fine and we acted normal. And there was one person who was like, wow, I can't believe you're doing, like, this is really brave. And so that like really stuck with me of like, right, like this is something that needs to be done, because the more that we hide this part of ourselves, well, one, we can't show up authentically. We can't show up as our truest selves. And that affects the relationships around us. But also, who benefits when we don't talk about wealth, when it's in the shadows? It only benefits the system. So those are some things that I think about. And to be honest, it's still hard. And I also think it's my work to do, is to be public about this and share the grappling. And that allows other people to come out of the shadows and share that about themselves too.
Yeah. And I mean, it's part of the human experience. And I think one of the things that I love about now being like recognizing my high sensitivity is that other people's pain feels so present to me that even though I may never experience what they experienced, I know that I feel it, right? So it's not that I know what they're going through, but I can feel pain for them, with them. It's also making me think of Lillian Watson. She's an Aboriginal artist and activist out of Australia. And she says, if you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your well-being is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And I'm kind of butchering the quote, but it's very much in that idea of like, people can tell when you're coming in with white saviorism, when you're coming in with like, I know better, or when you're coming in with a lot of guilt, right? Because when we're doing something for others that's caused by guilt, then we're trying to get them to assuage our guilt, as opposed to just us working together because our well-being is interconnected.
Right. Yes. And I love that quote so much. And it's true. Like, actually, by building collective safety nets, I don't have to hoard as much wealth. I don't have to hoard as much wealth for my family. I don't have to hoard as much wealth so that I like can drink clean water. You know, it's like, actually, if we focus on the interdependence, we are all much safer if we can work together and move resources in a way that actually meets everyone's fundamental needs.
Definitely. And one of the places where I relate to your story is I didn't really realize how white-skinned I was until I moved to Philadelphia. It's not like my skin color changed, But my
Right.
environment changed so much where I was now in a place where like half the people were not Mexican. And I think the idea of when Mexican was in Philadelphia was much more confined. Like they had a smaller version of Mexicanness. Whereas in Southern California, it was like we saw everything, like everyone. So I think there's that experience of like we don't really know what we don't know, right?
Right.
So moving with compassion. And I remember growing up, I would hear my brother would get teased. His skin tone is like noticeably darker than mine. And I just thought it was boys being boys. But then I
Mm.
asked other girlfriends whose skin tone was darker. And I was like, and I asked, and I saw it very vividly with both of my parents with their accents, but I still was not aware until, I mean, it's like so funny. I think I mentioned this in another episode. I didn't really realize I was white until I was 32, right? Like,
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's also like speaking to how subjective this is. Like it's all made up, right? Like this idea of
mhm,
whiteness and what that means is so different in different contexts. And it also makes me think about like within the Latina diaspora, like a lot of folks, like we don't, at least the stereotype that comes to mind for me, I don't think of Black folks as living in Brazil, even though they make up a
mhm,
huge, huge, huge part of those communities. And so, even when we talk about like Brazilian people, like that brings a certain image to mind and a certain skin tone to mind. And it just kind of like reinforces the fact that this is all made up. This is all just like a system that people created,
mhm.
and it changes and it shifts. And so, yeah, like the idea of middle class feels like another one of like, what does it really mean to be middle class? And that's subjective too. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that too. That's really vulnerable. And yeah, not to like flip it on you, but I'm like, what did that feel like at the age of 32?
It felt like I didn't recognize the privilege I had been moving with. And it emboldened me later on because although I am white passing, I am very much a person of color. And it made me think of, I remember being in the South, I think it was in Greenville. It was somewhere where they had to sit in at the counters. And then we went to a museum next door where they had like a colored entrance and a white entrance. And I asked them, where would I go? Right. And they're like, if you were alone, you could go through the white spaces. But if I was with my family, I would go through the colored spaces. And it did bolden me though, because because of my white skin privilege, I speak up more than I would ask other people of color to do so. And it's not out of saviorism. It's out of like, I don't know. My cousins are dark. Like it's just the interconnectedness. I think there's a really big beauty of having such variety in skin tones in a place, and white supremacy is all over, right? It's part of the colonial legacy that we have for the past hundreds of years. So even here in Mexico City, I feel it.
Yeah.
And how does that connect to wealth? I mean, the closer you are to power, the more access you have.
Right. Yes. And yeah, it also makes me think about within like, I think sometimes of like the world of wealth is similar to like the world of like marathon runners. This is not the best metaphor, but like of all of the people in the world, there's like a subset of people who run. Of that subset of people, there's like maybe I run a 5K, maybe I run a marathon. Like we're like kind of getting smaller and smaller in numbers. And then there's like, who are the people that are running the Boston Marathon and like placing really high? And so I think people who have had these privileges don't really realize that they're in this like really small subset of people that are like placing first at the Boston Marathon. Like they're in this like subset of people that's like so small, and actually just thinking like, oh, most people can run this fast, or most people have this level of athleticism. And so it's kind of like that reckoning of like, oh, right, like actually not that many people are even able to run for reasons like disability or lack of desire or the conditions that they're in, maybe they don't even have time. So we could stretch this metaphor a lot farther, but yeah, it just reminds me of that and how it's like, oh, when we like zoom out and really think about like the juxtaposition we're in and who are we around, who are the people surrounding us and what's that environment, like what are the narratives and the messages that come up within that and how can we like take a step away to be around something different. So yeah, thanks for putting all that in.
And going along with that metaphor of a marathon runner, right? Like who places first at the Boston Marathon? Like you said, it's so hard for someone who places first to like think that not everybody has that ability or that the possibility of doing so. And there's so many things below that of like what created the circumstances. And again, our circumstances aren't destiny. There's always the stories of people crossing all over and like going, but that bootstrap story puts so much pressure on an individual when really there's systemic roots to a lot of the issues that we're dealing with. So thank you. Going back to my questions, when you started joining Resource Generation, when you started being more active as a wealth holder, did you experience any pushback from people around you? People who were like, you should actually stay quiet, you should stay safe?
Great question. Yes and no. It really depended on who I was talking to. I didn't experience as much pushback in terms of like outing myself as someone who had access to wealth and privilege, mostly because my family of origin, of blood, they're really not in the same like political. So the fact, like, I'm like, are they even hearing these things? And I did actually invite my mom, and I'm really like proud and like, I really admire that she like came to a Resource Generation meeting and like learned about it. But I do experience pushback just from in the lens of what feels kind of like being a feminist killjoy, like around celebrating Thanksgiving, which is a holiday that I don't believe in, I don't want to support. And I get a lot of pushback around, well, you're being a bad family member, or you're letting your beliefs get in the way of like a really special day for us all to be together. And wouldn't that make so-and-so happy? So there's a lot of like messages around like guilt, just around like my larger politic that I still grapple with. I still navigate. That one feels really resonant because I did get into a fight with my family member over that. But I think more of the pushback came from the decision to divest I divested a significant portion of my assets, about a third, from Wall Street, redistributed a portion of that, and then changed my job I used to be making $150,000 and now I make about $50,000. So I took like $100,000 pay cut, and it wasn't even pushback, but it was a fear, and it brought up feelings of scarcity for my partner, because now I'm asking my partner like, hey, I can't split things with you 50-50. Like I'm able to do this work because of the privilege that I have through my relationship, that my partner makes more than enough. And so that allows me to be able to do a lower paying job and pursue work that feels really meaningful. And the conversation of, okay, if I do this, what does that mean for us? And is this something that you can consent to? It was probably 6 months worth of conversations. It was not just like, yep, you do you. And there was a lot of conflict, and it still brings up feelings of scarcity, because now it's, well, what happens if he loses his job? What does that mean for us? But I continue to remind myself that I have other forms of safety nets. I have a family that has told me time and time again, we could always come live with them if we ever need to, whether that's for a short period or a long period of time. We have friends, we have chosen family around us, and we have other forms of safety that aren't just our wealth. But I think the biggest form of pushback was just the fear of the ramifications of making things more precarious. But ironically, I will say it actually brought me closer to a lot of people in my life. I have cross-class relationships. We have a much stronger form of trust, and we're able to talk about hard topics and ask each other for help and receive and give help when it's needed. And so yeah, I've seen it also transform just my interpersonal relationships in a way that feels really powerful too.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing. And two things that I want to, again, reflect back that I heard. This idea that like hoarding, making as much as possible is what's going to give you safety. And instead you're saying, no, interdependence, long, thorough, thoughtful conversations with like where both parties get to say yes or no have actually meant safety. And you also like have like touched more into your extended both family and chosen family, right? So that interdependence is what's creating safety. And I think we've been sold this myth that like having a lot of stuff is going to keep me safe.
Yes.
But actually, when you look at like what makes people happy, having really strong relationships makes us safe. And for anyone from the Latin America diaspora, like we all know that inflation, devaluation, it can happen over a weekend. Like the wealth that you hold can mean nothing 3 days later. So actually like zeros in the bank have in the day to day of our life have less to do with safety than who are you connected to.
Yes. Thank you for making that so clear.
And another thing I want to like again highlight is you said that these deep conversations brought you closer to people, and it makes sense because you were being more authentic, right? And it's so scary. Like I'm more authentic, so there's more like if they reject me and I'm more authentic,
Yeah.
that's more painful. However, if we make it through, it's more beautiful, right? So
Yes. We can like hold it's like the trust fall. It's like, okay, I'm going to trust fall. You're going to
yes.
touch me. But if you don't, it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my next question, very related to your podcast, to your intro podcast, was do you have any frustrations with movement work? I'm wondering if you see something structurally that is done better elsewhere or that maybe you struggled with. And I'm really curious because you've were volunteering in movement work and then now you're very actively working in it and you're affected by it. So like you hold so many positions within movement work that I'm excited to hear what you see that could be done better.
Yeah. Thanks for this question. And I think what's true is there's a lot of critiques of movement work. And at least for myself, I think there's a few different things, but they all kind of go back, which ironically enough, they all go back to the sense of like, what is enough? Like, when is it ever going to be that I'm doing enough? And I've been like really sitting in this. I've been feeling a ton of guilt just about like not being able to show up even more in solidarity than I already am, because I also want to be able to take care of myself. And that's a new practice that I'm starting to do. And it's been really, really, I mean, this also sounds like, oh, poor Jordyn, like the world is bigger than your problems and yourself. And also at the same time, like if we can't even meet our own basic needs or take care of ourselves, how are we going to build a sustainable movement infrastructure to actually fight authoritarianism and fascism? So for me, I'm just like, what is enough in terms of how I show up? Is it enough to be doing this work 40 plus hours a week? Is it enough to also be, in the evenings doing more and more and more? And so I take a lot of inspiration around like decolonization and the rest is resistance movement. And really, yeah, like even thinking for ourselves, like how are we factoring ourselves in here? And so I talk to a lot of people that I look up to. I've actually had several conversations in the last weeks just to be like, right, me at me, like you have to take care of yourself to like really do this. And so that's just one big frustration, I think, in terms of not everybody, just to say, but as a movement, the concept of burnout is kind of baked in the foundation. You have to hustle, you have to work, you have to fight. And there's never, to me anyway, feels like there's never really an end because there's always going to be things to fight for. One win is amazing, and then there's always more things to fight for. And sometimes we lose, and that's really hard too. So I think we internalize this capitalism within ourselves of treating ourselves like machines, I've written a Substack essay about like, I'm actually the extractive boss. Like I'm my own boss and I'm extracting from myself. So that feels like a big one. And the other one, which kind of goes back to the question you asked me earlier, but just as how are we fostering a sense of belonging? When people are getting politicized, how are we making our movements irresistible and creating a soft place to land? And I draw a lot of inspiration from Adrienne Marie Brown, Prentice Hemphill, Dean Spade, especially around the concept of mutual aid and how that can be a base building strategy. But we really need to be able to see the humanity in each other. And I think we're so ingrained to like find an enemy and that enemy is evil and there's no nuance, there's no contradictions that can be held. It can feel very binary. And again, this is not true of all movement work, but I think we need to be able to build the muscles to be able to sit in the contradictions that we live in. We're living in late stage capitalism in the belly of the beast, and we should not be ashamed of having to take care of ourselves and meet our needs in order to fight for something larger and engaged in principled struggle. And I just think there's so much like shame that can come up from that makes people turn away, that makes people too afraid to engage in this work. So where I see that happening more effectively is, frankly, if we look at how the right is building their base and getting more people brought into their work, I think they are doing a better job of creating a sense of, maybe it's not belonging, but a sense of a place for people to land as they're getting politicized. And then I also look at movements like the Zapatistas in Chiapas. I look at the landless workers movement, the MST in Brazil. I look at autonomous zones that have happened in Seattle and like mutual aid that's just come out of like disaster response. And what's a common theme? We're all working together across identities, across our differences to take care of each other. And so I think if we can just root and ground in that, that can create like a soft landing place for people to engage and be in this work for the long haul. So those are some things. And also just like, yeah, of course we have internalized ways of being within capitalism. Like it's what we've been raised in. It's what we've been socialized in. So how can we forgive ourselves too and try to flex some prefigurative muscles and try different ways of being, knowing that it's going to be imperfect.
I love that. I recently learned more about that term, prefigurative politics, about like how do we, and that's part of anarchy too, of like how do we live today, the world that we want to live in? How do we create it? How do we bring it into reality without like obviously being in denial? But I so relate to the extractive boss and how internalized extraction can be. And I see how that will happen in movement work. I'll share for myself, like I didn't actually feel ready to get politicized or feel ready to take more into activism until I had like a really grounded spiritual community. My activism is grounded in my sense of like being a Quaker, and the Quakers just being like, we're going for peace. It's been 400 years, but they're still going for peace, like, and just that like long vision, and that willingness to just see that this is part of their identity, part of their work, makes it much more sustainable.
Yeah. And the community aspect too. It's like, oh, I don't have to do this all by myself. I'm a part of a community that can also hold it when I need to take a step or take a beat or take a nap.
Yeah. And we can't do it by ourselves.
Yeah.
This is collective work.
Yeah. I guess to close the thread of like how much is enough, what I realized is like, oh, right, I'm one person. I will never be able to do enough to change the world. Like whoever has, it's only been through collective organizing and community. So just as a reminder of like, oh, right, why do I feel like I'm never doing enough? It's because I realistically can't, even if I dedicated my entire life force to this. That's just saviorism. And so as a reminder to folks who might also be feeling that way, like where do we see others that draw us into this work that we want to build relationships with, and how can we find that and focus on what feels good and builds our energetic capacity versus the enoughness, which is unanswerable.
It's a moving target. Well, and since we're on the topic of enough, one of the like main points that you talk about in both of your intro episodes are getting to your enough number, deciding what that was, and then having to reevaluate it and it continuing to be a conversation. I want to ask you, like, as a financial planner, as a money coach, someone with their Series 65, when you're working with a politicized wealth holder, how would you walk a client through going to finding that enough number for themselves?
Yes. Well, just to name, it's never like a straightforward, like step one, two, three, four. But generally, a journey that we go on really starts with thinking about the future. And this is where I get a lot of inspiration. It's like, what do I want for future generations? But I say, okay, let's imagine you're 85 years old. Some of my clients are 70. So it's like we're imagining on different degrees of how far into the future. But let's say you're 85 years old. You lived a really fulfilling life. You have so much pride in who you are and so much self-love and compassion. And the people around you are all the folks that you imagine wanting to have relationships with. And so I take them through this visualization exercise of, okay, between now and then, what were the things you were putting your energy towards? What projects did you work on? Who's around you? Who did you build relationships with? What are the structures in place that made that possible? And how did you play a part in that? Like, what was your role here? And so we really start with that big, bold vision because that's what is going to ground all of this. Like, why are we even doing this work in the first place if it's not to build something better? And so then I talk about, okay, let's think about your life in particular. Like, what's the vision for your life right now? And what are your non-negotiables? Like, what needs to be true in order for you to do this work sustainably? And that's kind of like big, broad picture. And we start to break it down a little bit more, getting more grounded in the present. So there is an economist named Max Neef. He's a Chilean economist. And there's more great info about him, but for the sake of time, he has a framework called Fundamental Needs and Satisfiers, which really goes, okay, I'm seeing the head nods. Yeah, it really goes up against this like Maslow's hierarchy of needs of like, there's a hierarchy here. It's like, actually, no, we have a fundamental set of needs that's universal for the world. And the ways that we satisfy them look different. And some of the ways we satisfy them might actually be creating more harm or might be pseudo satisfiers. Some of the ways we satisfy them might only be meeting that one need, or it might be meeting multiple needs at once. And so we go through this process of it. We draw out a circle and we fill in, okay, for each fundamental need, like how well are you meeting this? Where are you noticing that you want to invest more in or put less energy towards? Then we think about the satisfiers. Like, what are the satisfiers that are actually meeting these needs? Where are there pseudo satisfiers? This is a lot of jargon, but it's basically just like, how are you meeting your needs? What are the things that you're doing to meet them? And how well are they working? And then we actually start, this is when it actually gets into the money part. It's like, okay, now let's look at your spending. We're going to do some grounding to get like ready for that. Because it's a lot of people feel a lot of avoidance around that. So you do have to kind of go through your own practice to even get there. And then from there, let's start mapping. Okay, where are the satisfiers in your spending? Like, how much is this mapping to your money? What do you notice? What goes unnoticed? Like, is there just money you're spending that you don't even think about? Like, how aligned is that? So we kind of start mapping it out, and then we reflect on, of these things, what did you feel proud to spend money on? What brought you joy? What felt misaligned? What went unnoticed? Do you have any regrets? And we just do this for like a month period or like a couple months period. It's usually not like this whole years back process. But that kind of provides a roadmap of like, what practical shifts do we want to start making now that will feel closer in alignment? And then how does that map back to that vision? If you are spending so much money on, let's just say, Amazon, and part of the way that you got to this new beautiful world is through boycotts and divestment, is there another way to satisfy that need that's not Amazon? So what your listeners might be noticing is it's not that complicated, really. It's just how do we bring our intentions into this? And then that starts to build what I call an enoughness range. So if we start with like, here's your bare minimum, like, what do I need to meet my fundamental basic needs, which includes more than just like housing and shelter. It includes connection, it includes belonging and joy, all the way to what is my most thriving self. And I like live on the ocean and like there's a horse. In mine, I have a horse. And so within that range, there's the bare minimum, there's the like living well range, the thriving range, and then I have all my needs, dreams, wants, desires met. And usually we're aiming for somewhere in the middle. We're not aiming for like, I'm a millionaire and I live on a yacht, unless that's like really core to your vision, which is usually not the clients that I work with. But we're finding that middle range. That's the enoughness. And your enoughness can change over time. So as new things happen, if my partner loses his job, I'm probably going to have to go find another job. I'm going to have to make more money. So we're kind of then creating a plan around, okay, what needs to be true to live into this enoughness? And what are some obstacles that might affect it? And then we make a plan for those. So for me, if my partner loses his job, I've set aside some money towards savings, which just want to acknowledge that's a privilege. But I have a certain set of savings. And if it gets below a certain amount, then I know I need to go find a job. I need to go hustle. And maybe that's for a certain period of time. So just to name that, our fears and what we are anxious about, we can create plans for, and that's a part of the enoughness too. So I could go a lot longer, but I'll pause it at that.
No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Just like everything you're talking about. And I love that you start with like, what are your satisfiers? What are the things that need to be in place? Because I start with values, but I feel like values may be harder for people to actually understand than the word satisfier. So that was like a learning for me. And I also love the like plan B, plan C, plan D. I think for those of us, like, I mean, another gift of high sensitivity, and we really haven't talked about high sensitivity, but I'll just bring it. And another gift of it is that we often can like see how everything is interconnected, which is great for looking for threads, right? Like you might start looking for threads and worst case scenarios, which increases your anxiety. At the other hand, though, if you're addressing them and you're saying like, these are the things I would do if that were to happen, that creates a sense of agency, right? We never know what's going to happen. Going back to like why hoarding actually doesn't work. It's like, you don't know what's going to happen. There is actually no way to get to certainty. Ambivalence and uncertainty is part of, I don't know, the operating system of this life. Yeah. But I really love that. It also sounds like you're teaching people, how do you get to your enough number right now?
Right.
And having it be guided by your long-term vision, but also how do you get back to it when there are shifts? Right. So it's really skill building. I love that.
Yeah. And it's really the process of how do we make grounded, intentional decisions that reflect who we want to be and the world we want to live in. And so I feel like I'm really just supporting a process of like building our muscles to make more intentional decisions and the ability to know that we're adaptable, because that's humans as a species are so adaptable. And yeah, it's like, who else can we lean on as these things come up? So, yeah.
Well, yeah, as a species, we're creative, we're curious, and again, adaptable. So to wrap up our closing question today, and actually, are you highly sensitive, Jordyn? Do you want to talk about that? Do you consider yourself that or no?
So I didn't know what highly sensitive was until I started listening to your show. And then I was like, wait a minute, this sounds like me. So I self-identifying a highly sensitive person. Yes. I feel like I can just pick up on all of the emotions around me, really take on someone else's experience. I conflate that a lot with codependency as well, which is something that I struggle with. But yeah, I would say yes. I would say yes. And would love to invite you to kind of like weave that into any part that came up for you around this conversation.
Yeah. And I love that you're saying this right now, that it like conflates with codependence. I think that's so easy, because if I can be so empathic with other people and I know what might help them feel better, I mean, turning myself into a pretzel for other people so that I feel safe, that's actually the fawning response. That's a trauma response.
Yes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, me, what am I doing?
Here I am fawning over you. But I was, when I first heard of this, and people who listen to this podcast are probably tired of like hearing this story over and over. I had a lot of
I want to
self-rejection.
hear it.
I had a lot of self-rejection when I first heard the term. I thought it sounded weak and feminine, and sensitivity was something I was trying to like block as opposed to step into. It took me a couple of years, and it took 3 different people at different times identifying me and asking me about it for me to be like, wait, maybe there's something here for me. And now owning it as part of the way that I am, and it's not that uncommon. It's like 20 to 30% of the population has this. It's not a diagnosis. It's just kind of identifying myself. What it's been really helpful for is giving myself more and more permission for downtime, unstructured downtime, including like right before this conversation, we were talking about, I have this new practice of sun weeks on the solstice and the equinox. And I chose those times because I'm not in charge of them. If I were in charge of the solstice and the equinox, I would move it around to fit with my schedule, to fit with my work commitments. But no, like those are actually like, those are beyond me. But I blocked my calendar for a week of no meetings. And it has been such a gift. And it really like owning my sensitivity and owning my need for unstructured rest time has given me permission for that. And in many different parts of my life, I've just been like, oh, this is why I need this. And now, I mean, it's just created so much more compassion and gentleness. But at the beginning, I was like, no, get that away from me. Like, that is not me. So I really love that you were like much more gentle when you're like, maybe this is me.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm like so deeply relating to everything you're saying. I'm like, this is a really good idea. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And it can be such a gift. I think, especially for as an entrepreneur, I'm in charge of my time. And because everything's on Zoom, I can just rely on my sensitivity to do a lot of the work of connecting with my clients. Just like showing up rested. And I've heard this elsewhere that when we have a regulated nervous system, our presence regulates other nervous systems.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That's so true.
So I want to go into a random story about movement work. So this is a story from Thich Nhat Hanh, where he talks about when people were fleeing Vietnam, there were some boats that capsized and some boats that didn't. And one of the things that he and others noticed were that the boats with people who were meditating or who were centered were less likely to capsize because their rooted, calm nervous system, and he was not using these words, but their sense of peace was as infectious as other people's sense of panic. So, and that is a gift of our sensitivity of like, even in the midst of panic, and I'm sure you've experienced this, so I imagine other people listening have experienced this, like I can still kind of step away from it and take a bigger look. I can root into nature. Like I have this massive tree in front of me that is like the best coworker because it's always just
that tree, like, look, I've been working for 120 years. Like
it just has such a long, expansive sense of time, and it's so flexible with all of the storms here in Mexico City. But it gives me, like, even though this might feel really overwhelming, if the bigger and bigger and bigger I make my space, the more and more I know that like everything passes. Yes. Right. So I don't know if that's part of sensitivity, but I know that that's one of the places that I've been leaning into especially when I'm working with someone who's in a crisis. It's like both, yes, you're in a crisis, and also how do I hold the bigger version of you as you grow into that? If that makes sense.
Oh my gosh, yes. And I think nature is one of our biggest teachers, and we could like bring more of that into this work of finance, but I was talking to, this was like a year ago, but I was talking to Leo Freeman, and I know that you know who Leo is, and Leo and I work really closely together at Oberon Capital Advisors. They were reading me, I don't know where this quote comes from, but it was on a tea bag. So I'm like, whoever put this quote here, like wisdom. And it was something along the lines of, in nature never rushes, and yet everything gets done. And it just is like a good reminder for me of like, right, like I can breathe. And also if I zoom way out, I'm not that important. Like it's all going to happen with or without me. So I try to ground into that too and look at I have a tree outside too. And I'm like, oh, right. I need to look at you more often.
Yeah, trees as teachers. And that quote, I've heard it before, nature never rushes, yet everything is accomplished. It's Lao Tzu.
Thank you. Okay. This is perfect. Now I can finally credit it. Thank you.
Well, as we start to wrap up, there was in your interviews again, your interviews just like left me with so many questions. I'm so grateful that you're gifting me an hour of your time to just ask you everything that came to my mind.
For having me, truly. It's a reciprocal gift.
Can you talk more about how asking for help is a gift?
Yes. So, and this makes me think about, when you were asking me about the pushback that I received, it was like both there was pushback, and then also it created the opportunity to build trust and build a stronger relationship. And I think for me, what it really is being able to ask for help, even though sometimes we're able to give and meet our needs. It's creating a sense of reciprocity, which actually makes everything more circular and sustainable. So if we just think of ourselves as like, we're just the givers, how are we actually creating a reciprocal economic system? We're not. And so when it comes to asking for help, and it could be so many things, but what it really does is it creates an opportunity, it's that trust fall, to build trust with somebody. And as we build trust, we get to move closer towards each other. We get to be more vulnerable, be more authentic. It actually moves us towards that sense of belonging and connection that we're so deprived of. We're so isolated. We live in such an individualized society. And so it's like breaking out of that sense of individualism. And I mean, to me, I'm like, this is a radical act because it reduces our reliance on capitalism. It reduces our reliance of, I'm going to pay this person to deliver this food for me because I'm hungry and I don't have the energy to cook food. Like, I'm going to ask my friend if they can share some of their leftovers with me, which I have done. And they have showed up, I will say. Yeah, I think it's the building of trust, and it's a gift for both. It's the authenticity. It's breaking up of those conditions. But one story that really stands out to me is this is a longer story, but I'll try to make it short and sweet. My partner and I, for a work assignment, lived outside of the country. We lived in Sydney for a period of time of like 3 months. And so my very close friend came and lived at our house and took care of our home, our pets. We exchanged like a monetary amount of like, hey, I want to support you and you won't have to pay rent, because she was able to move out of her apartment. So it actually allowed her to save money that went to a down payment on a house. But because we had started building that relationship, I had also let someone use my car who didn't have access to a car so she could take care of her son. That person ended up getting in a car wreck and I was out of the country. And so I was able to ask my friend, Stephanie, can you please go get my car? Which felt like such a big ask because I was like, I felt so guilty. I was like, I would never ask this of someone that wasn't my family, but I trust you and I know you'll show up for me. And I like feel so deeply grateful for our relationship that I can ask of this. And it was like, yeah, of course I'm going to do this. Like, you're my family too. And so it's just like, it really is the act of starting to build. And I'm even getting like teary-eyed thinking about it. But it's like those little fabrics of like sewing those collective safety nets. Like, this is actually the practice. And it doesn't look like that practice, maybe not. But it really does create those opportunities for us to lean on each other when the needs are higher or things are more stressful or the risk is higher. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I love that. And it makes me think of how, like, at our core, so many of us are just so tender and vulnerable. And asking for help is like a recognition of that vulnerability, but also it's permission for the other person to be vulnerable. So I love how you're talking about like those threads getting deeper. And I could see in your eyes that you're like, oh, remembering this experience with your friend Stephanie, just it moves you. And I think it also helps us, like when we look at the news, so much negativity, right? Because I mean, our brain is set up to look for threats, and the news feeds us that. And then when we look at our personal life, can we have a different version? Can we have a different story? Can we point out, can we focus in on, can we bring our attention to the places of mutuality, right? Which is, again, such a big part of your movement story. We didn't get into it as much this time, but I know that people who follow your work, who work with you, who listen to Reimagine Wealth will hear mutuality as a recurrent theme.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, it really is. And it's how we break out of all of this. We gotta have that. Can't be all one way. So thank you. This has been such a gift. I'm really honored to be on your show.
Thank you, Jordyn. I so appreciate you sharing all of your stories and going with the flow with this podcast. I look forward to sharing it with my audience, with your audience, and thank you for your work.
Yes, well, same to you.
For me, one of the biggest takeaways from today's conversation was that safety doesn't come from stockpiling wealth. It comes from connection. Jordyn offered a tender and expansive lens on what it means to move through the world with class privilege, to reckon with shame, and still focus on transparency, mutuality, and trust. Also, there's so much power in naming what enough is for each of us, not as a fixed number, but as a living, evolving relationship to our needs, our values, and our communities. This episode offers a window into what it means to build the world we want to live in, starting with our money stories, our inner conflicts, and our relationships. It's not about perfection or having it all figured out. It's about staying in the work and remembering we're not doing this alone. Thank you for joining me on Highly Sensitive Money. I'm Diana Giselle Yanez, and I hope this episode helped you see how money and sensitivity can work together while honoring our interconnected well-being. We have the power to create a system where everyone's needs are met because nature is abundant. If you found value in today's conversation, please take a moment to leave a review and share this episode with someone who could benefit. Your support helps this message reach more people navigating their own financial journeys. A thank you goes to Mike Schul for the music and Juan Antonio Nunez for producing. For more resources on bringing money and social justice together, sign up for my monthly newsletter over at allthecolors.net. I also invite you to schedule a free 30-minute call where we can talk about money coaching, investment management, and all things money and social justice. Until next time, remember that your sensitivity and deep thinking is your superpower.